They're there to protect the inner tissues from damage. The labia minora, or smaller lips, are more sensitive and delicate. At the anterior ends, they connect and form what's sometimes called a hood over a structure called the clitoris or clitoris. In the back, they just kind of taper off into the perineum, the skin between the vulva and the anus. This area between the labia is called the vestibule. It contains the openings to the urethra and vagina. And at the anterior is the clitoris, which means P, like the vegetable. That's just the external part of it. It's, it's a little nub on the outside, but it continues into the pelvic floor like the penis does. And it has erectile tissue in it that are comparable to the corpora cavernosa. And then the other erectile tissue, equivalent to the corpus spongiosum, is actually in the floor of the vestibule. So both sexes have erectile tissue. Its effects are just less obvious in the vulva than they are in the penis. All right, I thought I had some pictures in here. Where'd they go? Oh, they're missing. Hang on a sec. I'm going to bring up the slides from the other class with pictures on them.
What do you teach in your 1-year class that you don't teach in here?
Mostly more detail on each thing. So there's not any topics that we totally don't go into here that we do there. We just learn more about each one. So we have twice the time. Okay. All right, so here's the genitals. So that's the vaginal opening, the urethral opening, and that's the vestibule. So then these pinker flaps are labia minora, and these are labia majora. And it's hard to really see where the edge is because they blend into the rest of the skin. And that's the visible part of the clitoris. And then this is a sagittal section. We can see both reproductive and urinary structures here. So you've got 3 tubes connecting the urethra, the vagina, and the rectum. So that's the bladder. Here's the uterus. So about this much of it would be the cervix. This is just the most typical orientation where it's kind of folded forward over the bladder. Sometimes it's more vertical or even bent backwards. And this is the cross-section of the clitoris. So you can see, and they've drawn it similarly to corpora cavernosa. And then that's a labia minor and a labia majora. You can also see one uterine tube and ovary here. All right, questions on female structures? Functions. The erectile tissues do engorge in females, and it works the same way as in males. And that causes the clitoris to stiffen and the labia to kind of bulge out a little. So not as obvious differences, but it makes the nerve endings of the clitoris more accessible and kind of extends the vagina a little bit. Lubrication is mucus from vestibular glands that are in the floor of the vestibule and secrete into the vagina. Those are both part of the parasympathetic reflex. And then orgasm in the female doesn't have a expulsion of fluid like ejaculation, but it has similar responses in muscle contraction and feelings of pleasure. And the contractions of the uterus at the time can actually help move the sperm up towards the egg. All right, questions on these functions? Female hormones, again you have follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormone to control it. And this is actually where they get their names, is their effects on the ovaries. And then at least LH used to have a different name, but they figured out it was the same hormone and just changed it to LH. So, FSH stimulates the follicle development, and the developing follicles produce estrogen. That has the two functions of inhibiting FSH and causing the uterine lining, the endometrium, to thicken. And when the estrogen reaches a certain level, that tells the hypothalamus that the follicle is ready, and it releases a surge of LH that causes ovulation. This corpus luteum is why it's called luteinizing hormone, because in addition to ovulation, it changes these cells into a corpus luteum. Then the corpus luteum produces some estrogen, but a lot more progesterone. That term means pro in favor of gestation. It keeps the uterus ready for pregnancy. In the monthly cycle, the estrogen thickens the lining of the uterus. And at puberty, when it first starts to increase, it causes breast development and other fat deposits in like hips and things to cause curves. And it does cause some hair growth, like the underarms and pubic hair. Okay. Questions on hormones? Okay, so the progesterone is going to cause the uterine lining to develop those glands and produce nutrients for a potential fertilized egg. This illustrates estrogen and progesterone levels and the thickness of the endometrium over a cycle. The textbook length of cycle is 28 days, which I guess is supposed to be an average. I haven't actually seen survey results of the length of a cycle. They start it with menstruation because that's a time where you can really point to and say that's the beginning. So that is shedding the lining from the previous cycle. The endometrium shrinks back down. And then as follicles are developing and producing more estrogen, the lining thickens. After ovulation, you get more progesterone to cause the endometrium to secrete the nutrients. And then about here, if the egg hasn't been fertilized, then the corpus luteum degenerates, progesterone levels go down, and that starts the next menstruation. Questions on the cycle? One last structure in reproductive systems is the mammary glands. Structurally, they're part of the integumentary system, and they're actually a type of modified sweat gland. Their functions are to produce milk for nourishing the offspring, and also to attract mates. Humans are the only species who have enlarged breasts all the time. Others, they only grow right when they're fertile, or even only when they're pregnant. The external structures, the nipple is where the milk will exit. The dark area around the nipple is called the areola, and that's where the baby would suckle. On the inside, there are ducts that deliver the milk to the nipple from these clusters of glands that produce the milk. Most of the time, if you're not lactating, the breasts are just adipose tissue without very much milk tissue. That develops either during pregnancy in response to hormones from the placenta, or it can develop in response to suckling. So it's actually possible to breastfeed an adopted baby. So
How long
that's,
does it take then? Like say that you like, just like you, and then you adopt a baby, how long does it take for a baby to make your glands work? Or milk produce?
let's say like a couple of weeks. 3 weeks. 3 weeks, yeah. And
A
it-
constant suckling?
Well, a constant.
But not like,
There's actually there's a device that some moms will use where like you set it on your shoulder and it contains formula, and a little tube comes down to the nipple so the baby can suckle and get the formula, and that
Stimulate?
it feeds them and it stimulates the hormones that will make the breasts develop. Yeah. How much they develop varies from person to person. It's not very common to be able to exclusively breastfeed, but usually some gets produced and that has benefits like immune protections.